Good evening. Today is Wednesday, May 31, 2023. The time is 5 p.m. The special meeting of the following will come to order. The Victorville City Council and the same council also sitting as the Victorville Library Board of Trustees, Southern California Logistics Airport Authority, successor agency to the Redevelopment Agency, the City as Housing Assets successor, Joint Powers Financing Authority, and the Victorville Water District. Madam Clerk, will you kindly call the roll?
Councilmember Gomez,
Buenas tardes.
Councilmember Harriman,
Here.
Councilmember Irving,
Present.
Mayor Pro Tem Becerra,
Present.
Mayor Jones.
Here.
We have quorum.
Thank you very much. All right, we're going to move on to the invocation. That'll be followed by the invocation is going to be led this evening by Pastor DeAndre McBride of Sunrise Church. Good to see you again, sir. And then we're going to have that followed by the Pledge of Allegiance led by our police captain, John Wickham. If everyone is able to rise, please do for the invocation.
Let us pray. Dear God, we thank you for your love, grace, mercy, and peace, Heavenly Father. Lord, we pray for a special blessing upon all of the graduates here in the city of Victorville, Lord. Those that's graduating elementary, middle school, high school, as well as our Victor Valley Community College, Heavenly Father. We're also praying for our fire department, our police, our hospitals, Lord God, our EMS departments. Bless them, Heavenly Father. We're also praying, Lord God, you give wisdom, Lord God, to our city council, Lord God, our mayor, Lord God, even through Measure M, Heavenly Father. Bless the city, Lord God, all in our endeavors, Lord God, and let us prosper throughout the high desert. In your precious Son, Jesus Christ's name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Please face the flag and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Ready, begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, as per usual, Pastor. Thank you, Captain Wickham. All right, we're now going to move on to our next item. Madam Clerk, will you kindly present the agenda and any revisions thereto?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. There are no revisions to the agenda this evening.
Thank you. And now we're going to move on to conflict of interest declarations. Anyone? Hearing, seeing none. Moving on to the introduction to public comments. Madam Clerk, do we have any requests to speak on matters posted on tonight's agenda?
We do not, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. All right, with that said, we're going to go ahead and move on to our first business in order this evening, which is written communications, beginning at it is our only item this evening, and that is the fiscal year 2023-2024 budget workshop. Mr. Metzler, will you kindly introduce the item and take it from there?
Thank you, Madam Mayor and members of the council. This item is our annual budget workshop, our precursor meeting to ultimately adopting the city budget, which effectively is your policy document that serves as your revenue and spending plan for the fiscal year. And so, as we're currently operating under a fiscal budget, we're coming to the year end of that, and we're preparing for the new year. So we've got a staff-led presentation. I'll largely take the lead on that presentation. And bear with me here. We're supposed to have a power. There it is right there. And so we'll have a staff-led presentation to walk us through what is in your binder, or if you're using the electronic version, the PDF. And you'll actually notice that in the budget document that we sent out, it has a slightly different look than last year, in that the budget document unrolls a lot of those summarized line items that is the budget, so you can get a better detail sense of what's in the budget, whether it's at a department level or at the larger citywide level. So with that, starting out, hang on just a minute. So can I see it on my TV or my monitor up here?
Okay, and then so before we get into it completely, just council members, you have a hard copy of the presentation before you. So if you'll take notes perhaps as you go along, because we'll entertain questions and comments in one fell swoop. All right, Mr. Metzler.
So with that, we'll start out with the budget presentation. Actually, for the start of this presentation, we've highlighted with one of our next biggest projects coming up, which is construction shot of the Wellness Center in Old Town Victorville. Currently, we're expected to have that facility open around the end of August. So with that, this is our budget. First, we have to recognize, of course, you all as the city council. You're the policy making team. This is probably your most significant policy decision or policy making opportunity of the year is this budget document. And so certainly appreciate, of course, all of your input and feedback. We can't operate without your policy leadership. And then, of course, the way we're structured here as an organization, you do have an executive team that is responsible for helping you all execute on that policy. So you're setting the tone. We're actually moving forward with the executive team and then ultimately the large organization to move your revenue expenditure plan forward. And of course, we rely on the city attorney to represent the city in all ordinary legal matters. This one is. We do rely on a much larger organization to get us to this point, and so a tremendous amount of effort has gone into the preparation of this document, largely set out first by your leadership team. There's approximately 14 members of the organization that comprise the leadership team, and they're your directors heading up the various departments in the organization. They're the technical experts responsible for their areas. But then also I must recognize the hard work and dedication of the finance team that assembles this document for you. Your finance team being led by John Mendiola. Also includes Kim Scott, Christian Dominguez, Rick Vilcham, and Nikisha Blewett. And they should all be in attendance if we have any questions of them. And then finally, this is what your organization looks like. This organizational chart is not really changed from last year. The easiest way to characterize what you're seeing in this busy chart is that you've got, of course, myself reporting to you as the council, you as the council reporting, of course, to the residents. But we've got the organization divided up effectively into thirds. And so you'll see under my span of control, and we've really divided the organization in thirds to try to make this large organization much more manageable. But under my leadership or supervision is the PIO division, the Office of Economic Development, police, fire, municipal utilities, and airport. And then with that, you can see the rest of the organization broken down amongst the deputy city managers. Under Deputy City Manager Smith, you have the city clerk's division, you have the finance department, you have information technology, human resources, and risk management. And then on Deputy City Manager Davidson's side, you have community services, which I will speak to a little bit more in detail because that's being reactivated as a new department in this organization. All the functions of which still are under Ms. Davidson's leadership. The engineering department, you have code compliance, building department, planning department, public works, and water. We'll touch on animal control, which actually falls under the code compliance division. And currently, this organization is 518 full-time employees. So kicking things off, you should know that this budget has been prepared relying on all 7 of our adopted multi-year goals and priorities found in our strategic plan as guidance. It's a budget that embraces our organizational values, which include excellent customer service, integrity, accountability, and transparency. And it's been an important document, especially as we're now going through the process of developing our second strategic plan. We're expecting our new strategic plan to cover another 3-year period, identifying a number of new goals and priorities for the next 3 years. And we've been sharing with you, of course, the tremendous amount of progress that we've made in achieving the goals and priorities under the current plan. And largely, this document and all of our budget documents have been tracking what you have laid out as our strategic goals.
Mr. Master, I certainly don't relish interrupting you, but I noticed that we don't have the presentation on screen for our audience. Is that coming soon?
I can answer that for you. Unfortunately, we had a power outage that damaged some of the equipment, and we're waiting for that to be repaired in order for us to project it onto the screen. So at this point, we don't have that capability until it's fixed.
And that might be this evening or another time.
Another time.
All right. All right. So with that, then I'm thankful for the forbearance of our audience. It's certainly easier, I think, for a lot of people to see the the visual on screen. But I can assure you that Mr. Metzler and his staff are very articulate in presenting the budget. And I think that they'll give you all that you need to know. So you might need to just, zero in with your hearing skills into that. But I'm sure that they're all going to do a great job for us. All right.
Ma-
Thank you, Mr. Metzler.
Madam Mayor, they can see the presentation on this screen. We just can't project it to the ones in front of you. There's the PowerPoint right there.
Yeah, okay, but it's not, okay, gotcha.
Right.
All right, then I take that all back. I was looking that way. All right, thank you very much, Madam Clerk. Mr. Metzler.
So starting out with this next slide, and this is a very high level slide, really to articulate what I would characterize as what's in the budget. This is a big budget. There's certainly a lot of items to talk through. So we've got a few slides here really to try to highlight some of the high level stuff that's in this budget that I think is certainly important to call to your attention before we get too deep into the dive of the budget itself. But I think first things first, of course, this budget does include salary and benefit enhancements, includes enhancements to salary based upon salary study and benefit studies. We've actually gotten into the point of doing a salary survey every year. This is our second year in a row doing it. And we also did benefit surveys, basically reviewing our benefits provided to the employees. On the personnel side, this is a budget that actually increases the total number of full-time equivalent positions from 518 employees to 538. And you'll see in some later or subsequent slides that the change largely is due to additions that we're making in the fire department, particularly what we've talked about in the past, which is working towards enhancing our medical response team. We do have a new community services department. I should say it's reactivated. And with that, we've done 4 division realignments, putting back under the community services under a director, which the director is expected to start with us at the end of June, bringing back parks, recreation, library, and facilities back under that one department, where that one department director would then continue to report to Deputy City Manager Davidson. 2 areas that have been focused on and are included in this budget that have been part of our internal strategic initiatives has been really to start focusing on helping with employee development. And so with that, we've actually developed a citywide intern program where this budget in every department has been tasked with developing an intern program, identifying a particular position, and an area of responsibility that position is to serve. Ideally, recruiting somebody that's in their senior year of college, if that's the pathway that they're pursuing, and bringing them on for a period of 9 months, and coincidentally having those 9 months end right around that time when they'd be graduating. If everything's successful, there may be an opportunity to hire. We can't promise. But one of the things that we've identified is a need to try to start earlier in developing talent before they even get into our system. So it's one area that we believe will be helpful to us in improving the quality of our entry level entrance to the workforce, but that also gives them an opportunity to get in and get a start with us. And another program that we've developed, especially for the mid-level management support positions, are professional development programs, where we've actually got programs tailored specifically towards mid-level management folks that need additional skills to help actually grow and groom them for additional opportunity in the organization. Also, it's important to note that we have some public safety enhancements in this budget. First, we've actually talked quite a bit about, and effort is now underway. We do expect as a part of this budget to bring back, or this budget year to bring back conceptual design for the police department, which is envisioned to be across the street. This budget does include addition of a couple of deputies. One would be on our side of the ledger, as we would call it, to help improve the supervision of our patrol and school resource officers. So that's the addition of one corporal. We also have one canine SRO that I'm actually really excited about introducing this deputy into the SRO program for Victor Valley Union High School District. The canine is anticipated to be a canine trained to detect drugs on campus. We also have the addition of 12 firefighter paramedics, and this would actually activate two brand new paramedic squads, both at stations 312 and 313. Currently, we do have one active paramedic squad operating out of 311, and they're effectively the first line of response for medic calls throughout the city. And then finally, we do expect the delivery of 3 new fire engines that once received, and we're expecting to place into service around July 1st. Those engines would actually go to stations 311, 314, and 315, and then taking those frontliners out of service and pushing those back to reserve. So that would actually give us an improved apparatus responding to calls. And then also one thing that we've been focused on recently, we've actually been in quite of a scramble trying to address the latest demands placed on us, and that is to find a new sheltering solution in our city based upon having been given notice by our previous shelter provider of their cancellation of our services. So we've been active in developing a very short-term solution where we have a number of kennels outfitted at 2 of our facilities here in the city, but we are actively looking at different sites. We're actually envisioning a facility ultimately that would bring in about 180 kennels for sheltering. We would also include adopting out services, but we'd also have to be contracting for veterinarian and tech services. So that's going to be in this budget. It's a bigger item, and you'll see certainly on the animal control side a change year over year increase in the budgeted expenditures. And then on the fiscal side, I think it's important to note, as we typically measure the general fund along with the Measure P revenues and expenditures, we also measure against whether or not we're achieving our adopted 17% reserve target. And so this budget for both of those funds particularly achieves that as a projection to close out the 23-24 fiscal year. One thing that's new that this budget does include is a fire apparatus replacement fund. And so one of the things that we've been working towards is taking inventory of our entire apparatus inventory. And the value of that inventory is fairly tremendous. And of course, so is the depreciation on that. And one of the things, especially as we're buying new apparatus today, we're in a pretty good place. But it won't be too long. 10 years can fly by overnight, to where if we don't properly plan for the ultimate replacement of the new ones that we're buying right now, we won't have the money available to buy them when we actually need them. And so as we're putting these new engines in service, this budget actually starts the beginning of an apparatus replacement plan. And so this budget will include about $775,000 to go into that apparatus replacement plan. So if you ever have to replace a frontliner or a truck or a squad in the future, you should have the money available to be able to make those capital purchases. And then finally, this budget does include year 2 out of Measure P, where we're actually funding a capital reserve as well for the police station. And so that'll be money set aside specifically to help fund the ultimate construction. So altogether, what you have in your budget book is a total budget on the revenue side for this upcoming fiscal year of $328 million. And that's in the aggregate over 84 funds. And I typically like to identify each time I do this presentation for you and for the public, identifying specifically the number of funds that we manage, in large part really to illustrate to the public that notwithstanding a budget of $328 million, that sounds like a big amount of money, in that we could possibly do anything imaginable with that pot of money. We operate 84 funds. They're like 84 small business units. And so effectively, when you have the responsibility of managing an amount like 328 million over 84 funds, when those 84 funds have specific purposes, they can either be special funds, enterprise funds, they have special or specific intended purposes. There's a lot of limitations then on what you can actually spend that money. So in the aggregate, you see a slight decline in the revenue of about $5.5 million when you compare year over year. That's 328 million for this upcoming fiscal year against 299.2 million in expenses. And so you'll see also a decline similarly on the expense side year over year. And that does give you a projected aggregate surplus of about $28.8 million. We do have capital improvements to spend in the order of $45.2 million, similar in value to what we actually spent last fiscal or in the current fiscal year. And so taking those two numbers that we talked about as to the aggregate budget, the 328 million on the revenue side and the 299 on the expense side, the pie chart on the left shows you how that's broken down by category. And we like to show this in large part because I think the public will generally view local government such as ourselves as operating based upon taxes, and that's not entirely true. In fact, the makeup of our revenue is only about a third. Actually, it comes from taxes, and an example of tax would be, of course, your sales tax, your Measure P, or your transient occupancy tax, the hotel tax. But the bigger part of your revenue actually comes from charges for service at 42%. And an example of that would be your utility charges, your water, your sewer, your trash. If you're at the airport, that'd be landing fees as an example. So a lot of the revenue that we're generating really is coming from the service offered by your staff. And then on the expense side, not everything goes to personnel. In fact, only about a quarter of the total expenditures go to personnel cost. The largest part, 50%, is going to operations and maintenance for the city. This next slide, and this kind of illustrates from those 84 funds that we're talking about, the different types of funds are a general fund, a special fund, or enterprise fund. And you'll see that your general funds, which would be either general fund in this pie chart, but Measure P is technically also a general fund. We just account for it separately. Those combined are only 35% of your expenditures. Your enterprise funds are your biggest expenditure, and a good example of what would be accounted for under one of our enterprise funds is your water department. They're an enterprise. The airport is an enterprise. VMIS is an enterprise. Solid waste as well. And those are enterprises, as we call them that, they have to operate as their own singular businesses. So the revenues that they generate have to be expended upon the needs of those particular enterprises, such as plant operations or physical operations to provide the service. So breaking it down to the general fund, in this budget, this general fund comprises revenue projected of $92.4 million versus expenditures of 97.3, which does show a deficit spend of 4.9 million approximately. But we do have a loan payment coming in from VEMAS to the general fund. So as we have this budget in front of you, the projected deficit spend for this fiscal year is approximately $3.9 million. The largest contributor to this deficit is the increases seen in the public safety side of the house, particularly on the sheriff and the fire side. So to balance the budget, because you have to have a balanced budget at the end of the day, to satisfy this deficit spend of $3.9 million, it will require the draw on your general fund reserves. And so one of the things that we have done is to forecast your ability to afford that kind of a deficit spend. We, as usual, project out. And so what this slide does particularly is it projects out your revenues versus expenditures over the next 5 years, your dependency on general fund reserves. And I think it's important to note that the revenue side, starting out total revenues that go from $92.4 million in the upcoming fiscal year, projecting out to 105 in the 27-28. That's a very flat, fairly flat from a percentage standpoint, revenue increase over time. What is known to us and better known to us is the projection in expenditures. For example, when we look at the public safety contracts, whether they're police or fire, they've got built into their MOUs very specific increases over time. So they're much more easy to predict. And similar to what we've experienced before, and was a large reason why back in 2020 we considered the promotion of a transactions and use tax, which did get approved. It's happening no different now. Is the best we can project on the revenue side. The percentage growth on the revenue side is being outpaced by what we know on the expenditure side. And so as far as we can see, that's what's occurring right now. And this chart, as you project it forward, we do rely on general fund reserves. And you can see in this fiscal year, it's actually projecting general fund reserves to end in the order of $36 million, which is a 37% of the operating expenses. We measure it that way because we do have a reserve target of 17%. So even with the draw on reserves in this fiscal year, we're still projected to far exceed the general reserve target of 17%. However, it would be irresponsible not to try to project that forward. And so the word of caution that I give is, as we project forward, we do see a continued dependency on your cash reserve to fund future operations, to the point where 5 years from now we can see that number, that cash number, falling below your target reserve of 17%. I don't necessarily think this is the worst thing in the world, because we're able to actually forecast that far in advance and actually see that there's an issue. So we're not running out of money tomorrow. But what this type of chart does tell me is we've got to do a couple things over the course of the next 4 years to change that trajectory, and that'll be focuses of ours going forward. And I think the focuses have to be clearly on finding new revenue sources, which we have ideas on how to do that. Of course, we've got to somehow pare down the expenses over that same course of time, but we've got time to do that. This graphically shows you what we just talked about on the last chart. So in this particular case, this bar chart, everything in blue is actually showing you the cash, or the amount of cash that's in your bank account. And so as you can see, that over the course of the next 6 years is going down. The red line is actually being used to help show where your general fund reserve target is. So effectively, you dip below that reserve target finally in 27-28. And that's for the general fund alone. And as we looked at and as we've prepared this budget, even though we don't have, quote, the 17% reserve target applied to all the other funds, we do similarly natured cash flow modeling for all of our budgets to try to figure out if we have issues in the future. And of all the funds that we look at and analyze, this is the one that we identify as one that's going to really require some special attention over the course of the next 4 or 5 years. This slide is here to help show or illustrate of your general fund what are the biggest revenue generators contributing to the general fund. And as you can see, the two largest are property tax and sales tax. Those two combined, and I want you to take note of the product of the two numbers, which is adding the 22% and the 34%. The product of those two numbers is 56% of your general fund revenues are coming from those two sources. And just to describe how they're derived, property tax in Victorville, we get a small percent of the 1% that's levied on private property. And in fact, it's about 17% of the dollar, 17 cents on the dollar is what the city actually received that goes into that particular line into your general fund. The sales tax, we're talking about the 1% sales tax that actually got your local sales tax to the 7 3/4 level. We're greater than that, but I'll speak to that in subsequent slides. And then the transit occupancy tax, this is one that's commonly referred to as the hotel tax. And it's currently measured at 7%. And that's actually paid by folks coming to this town, staying in hotels or motels in your community. So this is largely a tax associated with visitors coming into your community. But again, taking note of the two biggest, that's 56% of your general fund. And the reason why I called that out is because as you look at the expenditures now for your general fund, your police and fire alone, 38% plus the 19%, and that's getting you to 57%. So hopefully my math is right there. 57%. So you're actually getting to the point where now your expenditures just for public safety, police and fire are exceeding your two largest revenue sources under the general fund. With that being said, it just speaks to the point that over the years to come, we are going to have to focus on identifying alternative revenue sources to supplement the general fund operation. Different story with Measure P, and as you're familiar, Measure P is a transactions and use tax. It's a tax that this council or that the council supported back in 2020 and was approved by the voters to add an additional 1 cent tax onto local sales activities in our community. So effectively, the sales tax is now 8 3/4 or 8.75%. So with that, and as a part of the original intent when Measure P was adopted, was that the council at the time, in fact, adopted a resolution to make sure that the monies were accounted for separately, even though they're technically general funds and could be spent on any general purpose that this council desired. The council at the time adopted a resolution and effectively established an intent and asked that these monies be managed and accounted for separately so that we can actually assure to the voters that the monies that are being collected are actually spent with the intent of the original Measure P. And so with that, we do have an oversight board that we do have to work with. In fact, we met with the oversight board last week, and we actually presented to them what's actually in your budget. The oversight board did what we recommended they do, which was not only review, but also find that the expenditures proposed in this budget before you is in fact consistent with the intent of the original Measure P resolution, and they did approve that. So what you're seeing has in this budget has actually gone before your Measure P oversight committee. But what you've got here is a cash on hand, projected cash on hand, starting at about $34 million. And so with that, we've been very fortunate to be able to start saving those funds for ultimate expenditures. But we're actually in this particular case projecting revenue of about $32.4 million. Approximately 30 million of that is the actual Measure P tax against expenditures in the order of just over $33 million. We're actually projecting a balance at the end of the fiscal year to the order of about $33.5 million. And I think it's important to point out this is a revenue that's actually surprised us amazingly over the years in terms of what it's generating. When we originally projected Measure P, we envisioned or we projected when the voters approved it that it was going to generate closer to $19 million. So this is actually far exceeding what we've expected, which is actually helping us accelerate a number of the expenditures, which are largely public safety and public recreation improvements throughout the community. Some of the highlights that are actually coming directly out of your Measure P, we touched on the three new medic squads for the fire department. Medic Squad 312 and 313 will be placed into service. Code compliance and animal control, that's something that we've expanded dramatically. Now those operations will continue to run 7 days a week, which is something that we hadn't done certainly prior to Measure P. We will begin in this budget, and that's what this budget is envisioning, is the beginning of a new animal shelter. We're in the temporary stages right now, or I'd call it the transition stages, but we definitely expect in this budget having a facility that can serve us much longer term, where we're actually going to have to get into the sheltering business ourselves. It also includes design and renovation of the new Victorville City Library. Operations and maintenance costs as that facility comes online. We'll have to take on the actual business model, which I can tell you you'll get a first chance to see that business model at the next council meeting, as we're expecting to bring to you the operations operating contracts for both the sheltering and the recuperative care components of that operation. You've seen this budget has facility upgrades at the recreation centers. You've probably seen a number of improvements already at your parks. And so this budget will continue to do that. And we'll continue to enhance traffic enforcement throughout the city. So with that, similar to what we showed you in terms of style, we do have a chart here that actually forecasts your Measure P revenue. And so with that, we track in this fiscal year, and you can see if you wanted to just compare the revenues versus expenditures, and then drop down to the meat of the chart. You've got a 17% Measure P line item, second from the bottom, that shows you what your reserve needs to be if you want to achieve your 17% reserve target. And if you look just at the surplus above it, you can see as we forecast through 27-28, we're currently projecting operating well in excess of the 17% reserve target. So with that, that's definitely telling you that Measure P is forecasted to be very healthy for the years to come. And then graphically, again, blue being the cash in the account, you can see the blue tracking well above your red line, which is the Measure P reserve requirement line. And so that's, again, I think just visually trying to illustrate to you how well that fund is doing. So jumping into the budget, dealing with the personnel and the organizational side of the house, one of the things that we wanted to start with is just sharing with you kind of the trend of our employee count compared to population growth. And there's been over time two large drivers in the addition of or the deletion of full-time equivalents. And so in this particular case, we actually show historically what the total number of authorized positions have been in the city, both including a fire department and not including fire department, along with including a water department and not including the water department. And so I think the point in this really is to show you that as this budget is presented at 538 full-time equivalents, um, we're serving a population of 137,000. We're actually operating with less full-time employees that we had in 2007, 2008, when we had dramatically less population. So I think the point in this is, even though certainly over the course of the last 5 years we've seen employee numbers increase, we've still been a fairly lean organization when you compare it historically. And then broken down, this next chart is really intended to show you the breakdown of where those employees operate. You'll see the biggest changes on this slide. First, the biggest change is the biggest direct change is with the fire department, and you'll see the increase from 82 to 94, and that's the addition of the 12 firefighter paramedics to basically stand up the new two new squads. And then you'll see some altering amongst the building and the public works department, particularly to where you'll see changes in those departments, but those are effectively pulling full-time equivalent positions out of those departments and then moving them to community services, realigning them to community services, effectively allowing for the reestablishment of that department. We do like to share with you the history of the cost of living allowance. And so the third column that's labeled COLA CPI, that's actually a column that pulls the CPI for the MSA, which we're in the MSA Metropolitan Service Area of Riverside, San Bernardino counties. And so we measure from March to March, and our March to March for this last period, March 2023, was 4.6%. And so that's the number that we were using to try to determine what we could do with this budget. And then what we have after having analyzed all the numbers is brought to you a recommendation on the salary and benefits side of the house with a 3% COLA for the non-represented employees. That 3% COLA for the non-represented employees costs about $1.2 million in total. About $48,000 is hitting the general fund. 3% COLA for the represented employees, and that's pursuant to an MOU that we negotiated, last year or 2 years ago. Time's escaping me, but that 3% agreed upon increase to the representatives is about $213,000 in total. And then finally, one thing that we looked at, especially as we compared our benefits to other cities, and I will say this after having done the salary and the benefits study, especially considering the enhancements this council has approved in previous years, especially last year, we are very competitive with our neighboring cities in the county. And so with that, we did find on the health side, especially on the family allowance, there was an area where we could be a little bit more competitive. And so one of the things that we did in this budget is to try to reduce the amount for the family on the healthcare side of the equation by increasing the matching subsidy, which is currently $500 to $700. That in the aggregate is costing the city only about $97,000 total. And actually only about 80 employees fit into that category citywide. So this budget does include, and the numbers that you have do include these costs associated with the benefit enhancements. So we're getting towards the middle, and we'll quickly get to the end. But one of the things I typically like to do now that we've focused on the Measure P and the general fund, like to focus on your enterprise funds, and this is your high-level view of what your enterprises are looking like. So first, starting out with your water funds, I do like to disclose any anticipated rate increases, and the rate plan that is adopted for the water district does include a 3%. This budget does include, based upon the rate plan, does include a 3% rate increase for its customers. And with that, you'll find that the revenues actually are outpaced by the expenditures. We do project a deficit, but that's largely due to the capital demands of the system, and it's not uncommon, especially in rate plans, as we consider budgets like this. We actually deficit spend relying on cash that's been built up to pay for capital. And then finally, as it relates to water, we're currently in year 3 of the 5-year rate plan. On the sewer sanitary side of the house, you'll see here just in summary format, we've got a slight surplus revenues generated from your sanitary funds are in the order of $24.18 million.
He could have Tourette's.
Member Gomez does not have the floor and will suspend. Council, we're going to take a 5-minute recess.
He wasn't doing anything. I've been watching.
Member Gomez does not have the floor and will suspend. She will follow the directives of the chair.
You guys are harassing him.
Member Gomez will suspend. Madam Clerk, please mute the member's mic. Member Gomez, you do not have permission to leave the dais. Member Gomez is violating Chapter 5 of our Policy and Procedures Manual. Time is 5:46 p.m. Okay, we are now not going to take a recess as I've seen no other audience member leaves. We're going to go ahead and proceed. Mr. Metzler.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So on the sewer side, we are tracking based upon the rate plan that has expired. We're actually working towards the adoption of a new rate plan. We're expecting that to be done in October. But for budget purposes, we have estimated an 8.38% increase in the rates. And of that 8.38%, 3.38% is the already adopted rate increase that has been put in place by Vivi DeBarret, who is the entity responsible for actually providing our treatment services. On the solid waste side of the house, this shows an unusually large deficit spend, and it has a lot to do with just being in not having fully gotten to where we need to get with respect to our SB 1383 organics compliance. So one of the things that we are doing is we are actively developing our rate plan. And our rate plan still has some unknowns with respect to certain elements of the operation. And what we're talking about is the new organics program, where we're basically going to have a third can that's going to be responsible for collecting your green waste and your food waste. And so we have included, because there are a lot of costs that are known, but because we haven't completed the rate plan, we don't necessarily know the unitary rate necessarily needed to capture all of the costs. So this will look unusually big, and we did it basically for cash flow purposes. As we have an idea of the costs, we don't yet have the rate, so we can't plug the revenue side of the equation. But I think the point being made here is that, especially as we're knowing more and more of the 1383 costs, we at least have an ability to cash flow if we can't get the rate plan adopted. We will get the rate plan adopted, and we're expecting to bring that back to you in October. But what I can tell you, especially compared to where we were at 5 years ago, when this fund particularly was going to run out of money in September, we've actually done a dramatically good job getting this fund back to a place where it's sustained. Your street lighting fund, and so this is commonly referred to as SLAD. This is a SLAD. This is a fund that's actually generates revenue from a property-based assessment. This is a property-based assessment that you'll actually find as a line item on your property tax bill. It's currently about $16.92 to the resident. And this is particularly funding community-wide streetlights, but it's also funding in large part the costs associated with your traffic signals and the streetlights at the traffic signals. And so this budget year does incorporate or project a need to increase that benefit unit price from $16.92 to $19.46 per year. It is a 15% increase, but it's not a very big charge per residence on their property tax bill. Storm drain fund. This is a look. We're pretty close to break even on this. This is your this is the fund that you'll also see on your water bill, trash bill. You'll actually see a $4 storm drain fund, same charge that's been in place since the 1980s. This is the fund that we're continuing to evaluate to see if there's an alternative way to fund storm drain, because it's not generating a significant amount of money is because is what is directly contributing to the limited amount of ability we have in actually taking on larger storm drain projects. SCLA, great success that you're seeing out at the airport, particularly having seen some land sales to prop up its cash balance. It is operating at a deficit in large part because it's taken on some facility upgrades to help create additional revenues to support its operation. And then finally, VMIS. VMIS. And this is the electric operations and natural gas operations out at both SCLA and Foxborough. Both are rate supported. The natural gas assumes an 18% growth in load. And our focus this year on the gas side is going to be transitioning and connecting into an alternative source of natural gas, being the Kern River natural gas pipeline. The electric fund does cash flow well. We're looking possibly at a 5% increase in January, but we're still modeling based upon where costs go in terms of cost to procure on the market. And then finally, I think it's notable and worth mentioning. On the electric side, we've had two monumental completions. First, the interconnect that we've been working on for many years to increase the capacity out at the airport. That's physically been completed. So we're just working on the management and transitioning of loads out there. So that's been something that we've been working on for a while. And then finally, our first green energy power contract has actually just come online, and that's bringing us 11 megawatts of solar power with 8 megawatts of battery backup. So things are looking pretty good at the VMIS side of the house. And then as we're getting towards the end, you always like to see capital improvements. Capital improvements are baked into every fund, but this is kind of a high level view of what's going on. First, of course, the Wellness Center, large anticipation. This was your artist rendering. And if you look at it very closely, and compare it to the next slide, you'll actually see it taking quite good shape with actually what the architects drew up. So, okay, that was supposed to be a video. But anyhow, Wellness Center coming online. We will have an item at your next agenda. But effectively, that's a facility that's going to bring in your 110 separate units, 170 beds to help the homeless community. Also, CIP, you've got a breakdown. Looks like I'm out of order a little bit. Starting with water, we've got a number of water improvements. We've got fire facility improvements. There are some upgrades and some remodeling that needs to take place at Fire Station 311, 313, 314. We've got some technology improvements. Sorry, I'm getting a little click happy here. Street improvements. Mojave Drive, if you haven't driven it lately, this is just the beginning of much needed road improvements to Mojave Drive. And so this is starting from the stretch of La Paz over the bridge to Elevado. So this is going to be a major street improvement, road rehabilitation I haven't confirmed it, but I would expect that once we're complete with this stretch, we'll likely go westerly towards 395 because that's certainly one of the major east-west corridors that we have that's in some desperate need of repair. Golden Triangle is going to see a large slurry seal project to go in and bring some life back to their roads. You've got a traffic signal modification that's occurring at 7th Street. We've got Old Town 7th Street Sidewalk Phase 2. And then you also have a traffic signal expected to be installed at the intersection of Mojave and Condor. This budget does include money being reserved out of Measure P for the police station. And so this is year 2. I'd mentioned it's about a $4 million draw each year. And so we'll be sequestering that $4 million to be used to satisfy the construction when we get to that point. And there is a dog park envisioned on the west side of the community. We've got some gas improvements. Just going to try not to keep this longer than necessary. We do have, again, on the fire side of the house, modular trailer planned at Station 313. We're going back and forth. It's either going to be a modular trailer or just expanding the existing footprint of that station. But what we do know we need at Station 313 is that as we activate the medic squad out of that facility, we don't have enough bedrooms to outfit, to satisfy the 2 operating units, an engine company and a squad. So we do need living quarters to be installed, and so in this particular budget, we do contemplate about $200,000 worth of funds to make that improvement at Station 313. The squads, right now, as we're speccing them, the squads that we're looking to buy, it would actually be 3 squads, even though we're only planning to activate 2 squad companies. The 3rd squad, the physical unit itself, would actually be placed into reserve and help build a reserve capacity of squads. So in the event one squad unit goes down for maintenance related purpose or gets in an accident, which happens, then we have a backup and reserve to stand up without disrupting our service. And right now, the spec that we're looking at is a spec that would actually look more like an ambulance. Because there's a lead time, we're expecting probably close to a year to have those ambulance style, box style squads in service. So in the meantime, if we can get the staffing, which the recruitment is actually underway as we speak, if we can get the positions filled, we have some temporary means to actually stand up those squads and get them in service using some existing vehicles that we have. This is out of order. And then finally, this is nearing the end, so I appreciate your time. As we look forward, one of the things that we like to do, notwithstanding the budget presentation, is give you a forward outlook as to what we're seeing in terms of the development pipeline. So in this particular slide, we've got identified projects in the permit process or actually under construction. And so with these types of projects, there's a pretty darn good sense that you're going to actually see these built and completed. And so starting out, we're certainly seeing still strong industrial development, and particularly you've got a project out at SCLA. Church and Dwight is over in Foxborough, and they manufacture a kitty litter product and a laundry detergent. They're actually needing to expand, so we're actually excited to see that expand. It's a facility in Foxborough that's been there for close to 20 years. Distribution centers, and we're actually seeing some warehouse distribution being proposed in areas of the city that we haven't traditionally seen, particularly in the Stoddard Wells area. On the retail side, we're all excited about Sprouts, and we certainly have seen Superior Grocers rehabbing or re-outfitting the old Builder's Emporium right there on La Paz and 7th. You've got a new hotel under construction with others right behind it. Fairfield is the one that's under construction that you see vertical off of Bear Valley Road. On the residential side, we've got 56 unit multifamily complex, and then we also have 8 housing builders involved in 14 different tracks within the city. And finally, we've got a medical office building that is going vertical. I just saw it this weekend, right there at Amethyst and Bear Valley. And these ones are projects that are in planning review, so they're being planned. They're not yet at permit or construction phase, but do give you a good sense of where the economy is going. And we're certainly seeing a dramatic amount of industrial planned out at SCLA. You've got about 5 million square feet of planned warehouse distribution out there and at Foxborough Industrial Park. And we've also been working with the developer to actually develop industrial buildings, generally in the northeast intersection of 395 and Mojave. You've got some commercial activity finally being seen at the southeast corner of Bear Valley and Amethyst. We still see a lot of single-family residential being planned with tract maps more that can accommodate more than 300 units. We've got some apartments finally seeming to come online or move forward in the process. And we also have 2 additional hotels, potentially bringing 200 rooms in the planning stages as well. On airport, touched on a little bit, but we have some lease activity. Probably the one big project that's off airport that has actually gotten through the planning stages. This council has been involved in the actual lease of property to a large hydrogen production facility, a company called Stratus Fuel. And so that's a project that's making great progress, especially on the fundraising side to bring in the actual money to build. And so that combined with a number of buildings that are slated to be built on the old golf course, which we as the airport authority just sold, we're actually looking forward to some good off-airport activity as well. And then finally, just talking about the next steps, there are 3 items that missed the budget, and I'll just call attention to them because we certainly intend to bring them forward as a part of the final budget on June 6th, presuming that's where we're going. But for part-timers, despite calling it out in the documents, the part-time COLA did not get baked into this budget. It's a $82,000 across the organization that will make sure the part-time COLA gets added in. This current budget as it's prepared doesn't include that. And we do envision the need to add an additional $300,000 for a project to be funded out of Measure I, a road related project. The money that we have budgeted currently, it's about $700,000. We're forecasting that might not be enough. So that'll be an addition between now and the final. And then the animal control, especially lately, has been somewhat of a moving target, especially as we've been exploring some other facility ideas. And so there may be a need to make some alterations on the animal control side, particularly as it relates to the addition for cages and facility improvements, depending upon what facility we are able to secure for the shelter. So with that, those are 3 that we're envisioning going forward. I think finally, myself, my executive team, my leadership, we're all available for the detailed questions you might have. This is also your opportunity to weigh in to the extent you believe we missed the mark or we missed something that you would like to bring to our attention that you'd like to see included. We can certainly consider that. And with that, after taking any feedback you might have, then finally the next step is to bring the budget back for budget adoption on the June 6th. We're at the June 6th regular city council meeting. So with that, I'm available for any questions or comments you might have.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Metzler. Madam Clerk, the recommendation.
No action is required at this time. It is recommended that the city council discuss and provide direction to staff regarding the proposed fiscal year 2023-24 budget. The public hearing has been set for June 6, 2023 to consider adopting the proposed budget.
All right, thank you. And before we move on, Madam Clerk, have you restored Member Gomez's mic, please? Thank you. Member Gomez has returned to the dais. uh, 5 to 7 minutes ago. All right, so before moving on to technical questions as to the staff report and the presentation, council members, should you wish to speak, please be sure to first seek recognition from the chair, then wait for a response to ensure you have been given the floor. Additionally, comments are directed to the full of the council. Questions are directed to the city manager, city attorney, or their designee. Side conversations of any sort with each other or staff is not permitted. This is so that our body and the public may have the benefit of our deliberations and discussion. In this way, not only do we safeguard transparency, but also we give what's due one another, to staff, and to the public. And that is our full measure of attention and respect. So now, council members, as per usual, there's going to be no motion put forward this evening. But because this is the budget is always a weighty subject. Each council member will have up to 5 minutes for questions and comments on the budget. So with that said, we're going to go ahead and begin with Member Gomez.
Will the city be contracting with other local businesses for the animal control services as stated earlier for adoptions and other things of that nature?
At this time, we are considering working with contract partners. Certainly can see that as the case relating to veterinarian services, perhaps veterinarian technician services, and it's possible that we work with an outside entity. We just haven't decided as to the adoptions. We do know we are going to incorporate an adoption or adopt out component, but those are details that we're working to finalize right now.
Putting your attention to the presentation on 11, there are several delineations based on percentages. Is there any way that for the future, for visuality and the actual understanding of these percentages, that we add an actual number cost? Because 45%, 6%, 7% could be very low, but if we see a dollar bill, it would be more measurable in terms of what is actually occurring there. That's for page 11. And then I just need clarification for measure P on number 17. You had said that the revenues and expenses for measure P was actual 30. What does that mean?
So let me answer the first question relative to the pie chart. And so the measure that you see there in the pie chart, it's actually grabbing data directly from the budget document that you have, and it's just summarizing the actual percentage. So we'd have to actually open up that pie chart to be able to show you the data. But it is in there. It's pulled and ties directly to the budget document. As to the measure P, what I meant in that particular case, because the total revenue generated to measure P is about the $30 million. I'm trying to find the slide, but I think the measure P revenue in the aggregate was about $32 million. And so there were some items in there, some services in there, because they were paid for, say the personnel or the staffing was paid for by measure P, to the extent there is cost recovery or permits or I know in the case of fire, when it comes to inspection, particularly on the prevention side, for monies that are actually generated resulted from the expansion of service using measure P dollars, we're actually accounting those revenues to the measure P side in fairness, so that measure P can get a whole picture of what the transactions and use tax is generating.
And then continuing on page 19 with measure P, there's a couple of forecasts. I don't see the library or their services. I was just wondering if those are not allotted here. Does that mean those categories were not considered?
Library is actually baked into this budget. The big focus of this budget, though, is going to be on the physical aspect, the actual expansion of the Green Tree facility. And then once that's done, we can transition over the existing library services to the new facility.
Thank you. And then in the binder, there's administrative fees. What compose those categories?
Administrative fees, what page are you speaking
In
to?
the beginning, we're looking at, let's see. So category fees for miscellaneous revenues, for administrative fees, it just has a delineation, but it doesn't have examples, so I'm not sure what they really mean.
If you can give me a page number, title of the,
So if you look at general fund revenues by line item, and you keep scrolling, you see all these line items, just generically, whether it's expenses or non-expenses. What does administrative fees mean?
I'm not finding it specifically, but administrative fees would
So
be charges for service associated with staff providing a service.
there's no page number, so I can't give you a page number, but it's behind general fund expenditures by line item. And literally it says miscellaneous revenue 47400. 47140 administrative citation fees.
I think you just described it. Administrative citation fees, those are associated with the administering of the citation.
For what types of citations?
Code enforcement.
Code enforcement. So code enforcement could be like cannabis grows. That's what I'm asking. I'm not understanding.
It could be illegally parked car on somebody's lawn. Could be a number of just citywide code violations.
Okay, thank you. That was not explicit within the term administrative, so I thank you for that clarification. The same for the composition of the miscellaneous revenues. What would miscellaneous include? One or two examples is good enough for me.
I think the easiest way to characterize miscellaneous is for those that perhaps are not regular routine, that have its own category, as many of these others have clearly established categories.
So would that also be like a parking ticket?
I would think parking ticket, we have a category for it somewhere. I just can't find it.
So as a member of the public and a council member for miscellaneous, what can I assume miscellaneous means? Just anything that is not administrative citation?
No, it would still be administrative citation.
Okay.
It's likely a type of citation that perhaps we don't run into too regularly, maybe infrequently, and perhaps because we don't regularly run into that type of a citation, don't have an actual account for it.
Okay, thank you. What issues are addressed in the legal side of the budget's report? It also just says the word legal.
Are you still in?
Yes, I'm still there. I just thought maybe paying the city attorney or any legal fees. I don't know. I'm just guessing.
Yes, that's likely what it is.
Thank you. And then for Measure P, there's also a list of expenses. I would just assume it's also maybe code enforcement, parks. There's no delineation for none of these, so and there's no dictionary or index that I can address to see what Measure P really goes for. So that's another question within categories: police, code enforcement, parks, I suppose, recreation.
Yeah, actually, it would be for all of those. And so just using full-time wages, for example, and we generally talked about it in the presentation, the number of different services that are provided for under Measure P. So, it'd be for police, it'd be for fire, it'd be code enforcement, it would be full-time wages for animal control. There's likely some parks maintenance costs in there as well. It'd be all of those services that were defined from the intent of Measure P. The actual personnel cost associated with providing those services would be in, say, for example, that 51,100 expenditure account.
And it also has part-time wages. that are being projected with Measure P? Is that also probably with the public safety side of things, I presume?
That's correct.
And for uniform allowance, is that for public works?
Uniform allowance looks like it's zeroed out, so we wouldn't be charging uniform allowance on that.
Vehicle expenses
Oh,
for
vehicle
public works?
expenses. It could be again any vehicle expenses associated with that service that's provided for under Measure P. So I wouldn't think first public works, but I would think police. I would think fire. I would think code enforcement. I would think animal control. I'd think those first.
All right, thank you. And for what area can I look for municipal bonds if there's a section for that?
They're likely in the department area, department budgets. So probably the easiest one to think about is the airport authority because they have bonds. Bear with me, it's a big book. Everybody have an idea what page we might find bonds? Probably for SCLI.
I was just thinking maybe there was a sub tab that said municipal bonds, but I didn't see it. I was just seeking clarification for that.
Page 48.
Where is it that the page numbers are located? I don't see page numbers. I don't know what page 48 would look like.
Yeah, from the agenda,
The binder?
the actual electronic agenda.
Oh, the electronic one? Okay, page 48 you said. So that talks all about bonds. I suppose I'll look at that in a bit. If that's the case. Is that the case?
Yes, it is.
Thank you. And then also for the CIP projects, do we have start dates or anything like if there's a expected priority and if there was a shift that's not within the reporting, is there any way that can be a part of it for the next upcoming start dates, expected finishing dates, anything? I don't see that on the list.
Yeah, it's not really useful information so long as it occurs inside the budget year because things change so dramatically. And construction, especially given the bidding processes that we have to go through, it's really too hard to pin it down as to an exact start date. In fact, it has little value for the purpose of this budget. So unless, of course, it's not going to happen in this budget year.
So is there a way to track it then? Because every 4 years or every so often councils do change, and that could be essential information to start out to see what projects are in line within that year, and if they change the following year, is there something that tracks that?
Yeah, that sounds more like the 5-year CIP that you're used to seeing.
Okay. That's it. I have no further questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Gomez.
Welcome.
Member Harriman.
I just have one question. The enterprise and special funds seem to be all operating in the red because we have not incorporated or increased the fees for quite a while. Do we expect to address that
Well, that's
fiscal in this budget period?
so not all of them are in the red. And in the case of water, we actually do have the adopted rate plan that actually does contemplate the 3% rate increase for this third year of 5 years. There are other enterprises where we haven't completed the rate plan, and they will be completed this year. But say, for example, sewer as an enterprise, despite relying on the same rate that applies in this current fiscal year, that's not showing a deficit. The solid waste is showing a deficit, but that's for extremely conservative purposes of analyzing the cash flow once the rate plan will be done in that particular case, you will have rates that generate sufficient revenue to pay for that. Street lighting, that's largely capital driven. So if you just look strictly from operations revenue versus operating expenditures, you're not in a deficit. It's the capital that draws you in the deficit there. Storm drain, that one does have a deficit, but it's very, very small. And then in the airport authority, that's not rate driven. That's actually more so driven based upon the business operations. And again, similarly, in that particular case, it's the capital that's actually causing the deficit. Saying it differently, your operating revenues are exceeding your operating expenditures, and it's the choice of spending available cash to upgrade facilities, making capital improvements is what's creating the deficit there. And then VMUS is strong. There's no operating deficit at VMUS.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Member Harriman. Member Irving.
Okay, thank you, Madam Mayor. I want to be mindful that I only have 5 minutes, so I want to make sure. I really don't have a lot of questions. First of all, Mr. Metzler, thank you so much for this very good presentation. And to all the staff members that were mentioned earlier, I didn't catch everyone's name, but you put in a lot of hard work, so I appreciate your effort. I noticed that you kind of broke everything out, revenues and expenditures by line item. And so that took a lot of work, and I imagine you put in your time after hours as well. I only have one question, Mr. Metzler. The rest centers on page, I think it's 13 and 14. I appreciate the visual on page 14 regarding us dipping into the general fund reserve. And it looks like by 2027, we should meet our 17%. What is that called? Revenue.
We'll drop below our reserve target.
Right. That's where we want to be. You mentioned that there's that we need to focus and monitor this particular fund, and that we need to find some new revenue sources. Do you have any ideas at this time? Because 2027 is only like 4 years out, 3 or 4 years out.
Yeah, I do. In one area, for example, that I think we need to be much more aggressive is on the cost recovery side of the house. For example, activities that likely could be tendered to for insurance-related easements, insurance-related reasons. Let's say drunken driving, traffic accident that yields not only damage to public facilities, but also yields the call for the service. I believe there's an opportunity for us to be more active and aggressive in actually pursuing cost recovery for the services that we offer. That would be one area as an example.
Does that sum it up?
Yeah, that's something.
Okay, well, I'm pleased with the document. If this in any way illuminates our path moving forward, I think we're going to meet our destination. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Irving. Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor. I also did what Councilman Irving says. She was reading my notes again. Great job, you and your staff. Many, many hours, I'm sure, with everybody. Along with what you just said about on your page 12, the 70% general fund, it's got me a little concerned in the sense, you're right, we're at 37% now. We'll be at 10% in 5 years. 5 years is going to get here real quick. Besides fire and police, I think all divisions that are called out to any type of alcohol, drug related, I'm going to just say it like that, any stupidity action that we have to go out, we need to start sending these people a bill. So that's all I got. Everything else is self-explanatory, self-said, and thank you very much for your presentation. Well put together. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. All right, so, and I appreciate all the comments from my colleagues and the questions. I join with my colleague council members in gratitude for the immense amount of work that went into putting the budget together. It's always months in the work, I know, and sleepless nights, I'm sure. So much appreciated. I know that you have to cross every T and dot every I, and I don't know that there's any better feeling for a council member during this time of the year than to be able to have confidence in the work that's being put before us. So much appreciated to you. I do have a few questions, if I may. So let's see, beginning with slide 12 on the general fund reserve forecast. So Mr. Metzler, you indicated that Measure P is healthy for years. Measure P looks healthy for years to come. With that in mind, I know that when this originally came across, it was the council's intent to bring on 30 new police personnel. We were at the 11 member mark at this point, I believe. So we have 19 more to go. My understanding is we've held off on that because we need these added facilities before we can bring additional personnel on. Are we still going to, once that's up and running, are we still going to be on target for those additional?
I don't know at this time.
Okay, and so I'm going to just express concern in that area because that was part of the public safety plan, and that was embraced by the council and by the community as what was needed, and that was part of the reason I think that our community voted in favor of Measure T, because public safety is of course a huge issue. So you know, looking again at page 13, just to be very clear, when we get to the year 26-27, we are going to be drawn down to that 17, based on projections, down to that 17% general revenue reserve, general fund revenue reserve.
That's correct.
Okay. And then if we look at slide 15 under transient occupancy tax, in thinking about looking for new revenue sources, we're at 2%, excuse me, that's 2% on the 2024 budget. The current rate is about 7%, if I recall correctly, for the TOT.
That is correct.
Okay. What's the likelihood of increasing that? Because as I understand, that's pretty low, relatively speaking, to other communities.
It is fairly low compared to other communities. The transient occupancy tax, the hotel tax, is a general tax. And so if there was a desire to increase that to make it, say, more competitive to neighboring communities, neighboring areas, that is something the council would have to deliberate in the form of a measure. The council would actually have to approve the measure, I believe, by a 4/5 vote. Don't quote me on that. I could be wrong. But anyhow, there has to be a deliberation for the council to consider it even being placed on the ballot. And presuming you can get past that hurdle, then being that it would be a general tax, would have to go before the voters, and you'd have to have 50% plus one vote to approve an increase to that tax. Very similar process we just went through with Measure P.
Right. All right, thank you. And then on slide 23, in looking at, well, slides 22 and 23. So in looking at the number of positions for building, it's 2023, 2024 is down 50% to 13 positions. And I know that you remarked on that a little bit. Can you fill me in on that again? I don't think I quite caught it.
Yeah, and so there's a number of employees in the building department that are part of what we call the facilities division. They would get realigned back to the community services department.
Okay. All right. And then also looking in the past, we had 2007, 2008, we had authorized positions of 643, 2023, 24 is 538. So that's still well below what we had in 2007, 08. But is that 100% the correct gauge. I mean, there's been restructuring and organization over the year. I mean, it seems to me that we're an efficiently run organization. Even though we have that many less than we had years back, would you consider ourselves still an efficiently run organization?
And efficiently run organization?
Yes.
Yes, absolutely. And, it's hard exactly to find the best metrics, to say, um, you know, to compare us to previous years. What I can tell you beyond population, if you were to look at other metrics that I think were meaningful, I'd look at things like call volume, whether it's police or fire. I would look at the number of cases that we track, say on the code enforcement side, with the proactive approach that we've taken and also the concept of embrace the complaint that we as the city staff have kind of built into our culture here, but then also invited the public to share with us those concerns. I would look at those kind of metrics, and I would bet you if I pulled those metrics out beyond population in this particular slide, you'd see those metrics showing that we're doing dramatically greater caseload. Period. And so efficient, I think, is probably exactly the word to use to describe where we're at compared to back then.
Okay. And so then on that note, on slide 16, when we're looking at expenditures by department, we look at police at 38%. So I am confident that we've anticipated increases to contracts coming up on police because that seems to be the normal order of the day.
Correct.
And I'm very appreciative of the amount that's going to be added to fire and so forth, especially in light of the update that we had recently from fire, and just the sheer call volume is it's mind-boggling. And as our population increases, we can expect that to go up, absent some other things that we're working on to improve efficiencies. And again, and I'm going to make my point again. I think my opinion is that we need to place some emphasis on, and once we get facilities built, increasing.
Your time is up.
Thank you.
And I could speak to that if you like.
Yes.
And so, yeah, those are good assumptions that they are going to increase on the police and fire side. I think it's important to note, though, that the service is evolving, whether it's police, fire, code enforcement. They're evolving, they're changing, and they're going to continue to change. If we tried to do an apples to apples comparison of, say, for example, fire service to what it was before we took it back from the county, it's not a direct comparison. It's not apples and apples. It's dramatically changed. And I'll use fire as an example again. It's going to change again, especially as we're expanding we never envisioned expanding our squad mix the way we are currently, because the call volume, now that we understand it better, we have to respond to it. But we're not going to be done on the fire side. And my point is, these costs are going to continue to change, and they may be exponential, because when we start considering arenas or areas such as community paramedicine, to where effectively, in some respects, we're going to be making house calls just to help reduce the call volume to the frontline engine companies, we're going to be providing a much different service. And with that's going to come a cost. And so I think what I'm thankful for, despite, perhaps what was envisioned, say, back in 2020 when we first established the intent and got the measure in place, what I'm thankful for is that we actually have the resources available to adapt and adjust with these changes in the demand for services as they're being, because had we not had that resource, we would be struggling dramatically. I can't say it more simply than that.
Okay. And so I do have one additional question, and I would ask the council, and I would like to make that a motion to be able to ask one additional question, though my time is up, if there's a second. Thank you. I appreciate it. Madam Clerk, can you vote on that, please? Take the vote.
Councilmember Gomez?
Yes.
Councilmember Harriman?
Yes.
Councilmember Irving?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Becerra?
Yes.
Mayor Jones?
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously.
I appreciate you, my colleagues. All right. So in thinking about bringing in revenue, we had some members come to our council meetings a little bit back, truckers and the dilemmas that they were facing. And I know that you're going to report back to us at some point on that. But can that be, perhaps something that we might look at if the city gets involved in some way in providing some type of specialized parking that might generate some revenue to the city?
That's certainly a possibility. When those folks came forward, there was a thought there as to potentially being able to use that to generate revenues for the city. Didn't get very far with it to be able to try to estimate or quantify. But whether it's that, I think we're going to learn a tremendous amount here in the near future about hydrogen and ultimately the delivery of hydrogen for hydrogen fuel vehicles. I actually think they're going to compete amazingly well with the EV market. I think that's an area that we as a city should very much be interested in pursuing. Of course, not only to help promote a green initiative, but I do think that there are revenue generating capabilities there. That's one that I would definitely keep my eye on. And there may be opportunities in expanding franchise fees for the utilities that currently operate in the city and enjoy the benefits of our public right of way to provide their utility services.
Okay, great. Much appreciated. All right, with that said, I think we've had a very good dialogue, really good questions. I think it's instructive, informative for not only the council, but most certainly our constituents. And so there's no need for any kind of a motion here, but it seems to me, based on what I've heard, that we have consensus in going forward with the way that everything's been presented tonight, with the understanding that there's 3 items that were not put into the presentation, which is the part-time COLA that wasn't baked in of about 82,000. The roads funded by Measure I might not be enough, and then also rising costs or unexpected costs associated with animal control. It appears that we have consensus. I'm not hearing anything counter to that. So with that said,
Mayor Jones,
would you like?
are you asking for votes?
Could you please ask for recognition?
I don't know. I said Mayor
Yeah,
Jones, trying to capture your.
Madam Mayor, may I have
attention.
recognition?
I mean, if you'd like to recognize
Yes.
me. So I'm not
Yes.
understanding. Are you asking for a yes, no? Because consensus doesn't mean the full body. So are you asking for a yes,
Correct.
no?
So I'm not asking for a vote. So looking for direction via consensus is a more informal way of handling this. And that's at the chair's discretion based on what I'm hearing and seeing. It appears to me that we have consensus in the way that that we're moving forward with the way that the presentation went this evening.
Well, so then in that case, I've been recognized. I just want to object
Yeah.
and agree with that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, so Mr. Metzler, you have a direction given by consensus of the council to move forward. This is going to come back to us on June 6th.
That is correct.
All right, very good. With that said, our business before us this evening is concluded. There's nothing else before us. And matter of housekeeping, all council members. All council members, staff, audience members will kindly vacate council chambers and City Hall within 10 minutes. That's 6:48 p.m. so that these facilities may be cleaned and secured for the evening. Members of the audience are not permitted behind the dais. This meeting is adjourned.
Yes, ma'am. Ay, ay, ay. Me too. Be careful.